what I needed to do there. Sorry about that, everybody. Just had something live on my phone, and I didn't want to put that through my computer. We're gonna go in here in a second. Let everybody join in. Computer. We're gonna go in here in a second. Let everybody join in. Computer. We're gonna go in here in a second. Let everybody join in. Computer. We're gonna go in here in a second. Okay. Well, whatever. All right. Well, that was a good idea. Just trying to do something a little technical on my side of things, but it seems to be working fine. Just fine now. So anyway. Okay, so welcome in, everybody. Welcome to the program tonight. Happy New Year. Hope you had a great holiday season. Mine was nice and peaceful. I did get sick, but other than that, it was fine. Watched a lot of football. Unfortunately, my Oklahoma Sooners lost in the playoff. The only team in college playoff history to choke away a 17-point lead in a playoff game twice, and I was there for one of them. It's not fun. I don't, 0 out of 10 would not recommend. But I hope you got, someone saying no sound on YouTube. Should be working here. Should be working. Let's see. Can you, hopefully you can hear me now on YouTube. Just trying to get everything together. I'm assuming that you can hear me. It seems to be working. Someone says I can hear you on Instagram. I don't know why it's not going to YouTube. It's going everywhere else. Let me disconnect the YouTube stream and start it over. Maybe that'll help. Just ironing out the kinks. That happens with technology. Okay, so people are starting to come in, and we've got a lot to talk about. And I'm here to talk about what you want to talk about. So if you have any questions, any comments, leave them in the chat. Max says you can hear me on YouTube. Thank you. Cool. Excellent. Appreciate that. All right. So if you have any questions, any comments, go ahead and leave them in the chat, and we'll try to talk about that. I've got a bunch of stuff I want to talk about tonight. But welcome into the show. I'm Brian Schott. I am the publisher and managing editor of Utah Political Watch. You can read my website at utahpolitics.news. It is a website that is journalist-owned, journalist-operated, no corporations. I don't know if you saw what happened with CBS News last night. That was a freaking disaster. And basically, their newscast is just reading press releases on the air. It was kind of embarrassing. But that's what happens when you have corporations who own news outlets. Sometimes. Not every time, but sometimes. No corporation here. Journalist-owned, journalist-operated. Anyway, my website is utahpolitics.news. You can sign up for my newsletter there for free, or you can become a paying subscriber. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Emma Jolo says, I'm so sorry, maybe it was a me problem. No, I restarted the stream, so I'll take the blame for that. Oh, there's a lot of stuff going on, and we are right in the middle of candidate filing season for most of the offices except for Congress, because the legislature moved the filing dates in order so they can appeal the judge's decision in the redistricting case. We are live on TikTok. We are live on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch tonight. Kathy says, tell us more about CBS last night. Well, they relaunched the CBS Evening News. I can't... the name of the new anchor is escaping me, but they did put out some things that their new principles for CBS News, and they're no longer relying on experts. They're no longer relying on those things. They're relying on you. They want to hear from real people about the news. And one of their guiding principles is, we love America and we're not afraid to say it. Great. I love America too. I'm not afraid to say it. But that as everyone can probably guess, is code to appeal to a certain subsection of the American electorate. Spoiler alert: they're not going to watch you anyway. They already don't trust you. They don't like the mainstream media. So I just think it's a losing proposition to try and steal. The only way that you're going to steal audience away from Fox News is to be more extreme than Fox News. I'm sorry to say it, but that's true. But it was kind of a disaster last night. Christy Flower on TikTok says, CBS is toast. Yeah, I kind of guess. I'm guessing that that's the reason why Bari Weiss was hired to head up CBS News. Bari Weiss has never been a journalist. She's always been an opinion writer. Not a very good opinion writer, but she's an opinion writer. She's never worked in a newsroom. She's never had to chase stories. She doesn't understand how that works. I knew they were toast when they killed the story on the CCOT torture prison in El Salvador that America is sending migrants to. I think it's hilarious that they didn't realize that story was going to go out to their Canadian affiliates, and the Canadians were going to publish it. And if you haven't seen it, you should watch it. It's fantastic. But the reason that Bari Weiss killed it is because they didn't get anyone from the Trump administration on the record, which basically hands veto power to the Trump administration for any story that CBS News wants to do. They can't get someone on the record to sit down for an interview, then they're not going to do the story. And that's shameful and disgraceful. No comment is a comment. No comment is a response. But that's not what Bari Weiss is trying to do at CBS News. So we've got a lot of stuff going on in Utah politics. And again, the chat is open for you to leave your questions and your comments. But let's talk about candidate filing, because there are some really interesting races in the Utah legislature that you should probably pay attention to. You should probably look at. I do have I put together a candidate tracker on my website, utahpolitics.news. I keep it up to date. I'm trying to track all the candidate filings for the House and the Senate from around the state. Let's look at the Senate first. There are some races there that you need to pay attention to. The biggest one is in SD 7, Senate District 7. That's one held by Senate President Stuart Adams. And this is going, I'm not going out on a limb here saying this is likely going to be his most difficult re-election campaign ever for the legislature. I wrote about this the other morning. Adams has never been forced into a primary, and he's got 3 Republicans challenging him for the nomination in Senate District 7, which is almost unheard of. He is one of the most powerful politicians in the state. His campaign has hundreds of thousands of dollars. He has a couple of PACs under his control. Those have hundreds of thousands of dollars. You usually do not challenge someone like that, but he has been plagued by scandal for the last couple of years. Some ethical problems, some scandals, and we'll get into that in a second. But he's got 3 Republicans challenging him for the nomination. Chief among them, the most prominent name is Stephanie Hollis, and she is the former general counsel for Weber State University. So she is a serious candidate. And Adams has never faced a field like this. When he went to the House in 2002, he was appointed in a midterm election because Kevin Garn, I wanted to say Jake Garn, Kevin Garn resigned because he was running for Congress. And Adams didn't have to win an open election to get that seat. He just had to convince a couple of dozen Republican delegates. And then when he ran for re-election in 2004, he won the nomination at the convention. Then he cruises to a win in the general by 50 points. He did not run for re-election in 2006, went to the Utah Transportation Commission. But then in 2009, Senator Greg Bell became the lieutenant governor. Lieutenant Governor Gary Herbert becomes the governor. He taps Greg Bell to be his lieutenant governor. That opened up a seat in the Utah Senate. And Adams ran for it in a special election. Again, only having to convince a couple of dozen of Republican delegates. So that's how he went back to the legislature and the Senate. And then in 2010, he wins at convention, cruises by 50 points in the general. In 2014, re-election campaign, he did have a challenger at the convention, easily wins that, cruised again with a 50-point margin in the general. In 2018, he was unopposed in both the Republican convention and in the general election. That was the easiest election of his life. And then in 2022, he did have a challenger at the Republican convention. And this is not the state convention. This is the Davis County Republican convention. He had a challenger at the Davis County convention, won the nomination easily, and then he really didn't have a major opponent in November. There was a nominee from the United Utah Party, and he wins by 44%. But this time around, he's got 3 Republicans challenging him. And that's usually a sign that people see him as being vulnerable. And he knows it. I mean, the biggest tell for me that Adams knows he is facing a tough re-election bid this time is because his campaign sent out a big splashy press release saying that he had filed for re-election, which everyone expected. He hired Election Hive, which is the major election consulting firm in the state. They run the campaigns of almost all of the candidates, all the Republicans. So he hired them and they're running his campaign. They send out a big press release. You take all that together and that tells me Adams knows he's in for a fight. Why is he in for a fight? Well, if you remember, last year he faced calls to resign after he helped orchestrate a change to Utah law after his 18-year-old step-granddaughter was charged with 2 counts of child rape and 2 counts of sodomy on a child. Both of those are first-degree felonies after she had sex with a 13-year-old. Anyone under 14 in Utah cannot consent. So it was 4 first-degree felony counts that his step-granddaughter was facing. That happened after that happened in the subsequent legislative session. Adams worked with Senator Kevin Cullimore to make a change to Utah law. Up until that time, prosecutors, if there was a circumstance where someone who was under the age of 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, had sex with someone under the age of 14 who could not consent, prosecutors had the option of charging them with a 3rd-degree felony because they're both technically minors, right? But when you turn 18, you are legally an adult. And that's why the 4 first-degree felonies happen. They made a change to the law that said prosecutors had the option of charging an 18-year-old who has sex with someone who cannot consent, a child. It is a child under the age of 14 with a 3rd-degree felony instead of a 1st-degree felony, but only if they're still in high school. And that just happened to be the exact circumstance that Adam's step-granddaughter was in. Now, the law was not retroactive. Adams didn't actively lobby for this. But the prosecutor, the judge, and the defense attorney in the case say that this change to the law is the primary reason why Adam's step-granddaughter was offered a plea deal for a much lower charge. She got a plea deal because of this change in the law. They didn't have to do it. As I said the law was not made retroactive, but that's the reason. But that it's in the court record. They all said that this was the primary reason why they did that. So that's one of the scandals that Adams has been facing over the past year. In 2024, I reported on this. There were several complaints made about him to the lieutenant governor's office for violating campaign finance disclosure laws. In Utah, when you disclose an expense, you have to specify the ultimate payee. But what Adams was doing was he was just saying American Express, and then there would be these massive payments to American Express from his campaign account with no detail about what it was. And that's illegal. That's not allowed under the law. But these complaints came in, and Adams got some conflicting information from the lieutenant governor's office. And so the lieutenant governor's office said they weren't going to pursue the complaint. They weren't going to give any sanctions, but they did admit that he broke the law with this. Now he's changed the way that he's been working his campaign and those PACs under his control. And if you remember, in 2022, Adams and two of his grandchildren attended the 2022 FIFA World Cup in Qatar. And that trip was paid for by the Qatari government. They went there to see the U.S. men's team play a soccer match. I believe it was against England. Now, there's no requirement in state law that you have to disclose travel that's paid for by a foreign government. But Representative Candace Perucci has several times tried to pass that bill, and it's gone nowhere. I think it got through the House one year, and then it was killed in the Senate. So anyway, Stuart Adams is facing a very, very tough re-election bid. Let me look back through some of the comments and see if there's anything here before we go on to the next one. Again, if you're just joining the live tonight, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the chat. I'd love to hear from you. Let's talk about another Senate race. Kathy just brought this up on Instagram, so let's talk about it. Senate District 5. That is a seat held by Ann Milner. Well, Ann Milner has not filed for re-election yet. And Jill Kofod, who was in House District 10, surprised everybody by filing for that seat. Now, Jill Kofod, she barely won her House seat in 2024. She beat Democrat Rosemary Lesser by 309 votes, I believe. 2 years prior, Kofod and Lesser faced off, and Lesser won that. The Democrat won that by about 500 votes. So a very, very tough campaign, both times. And it was going to be another rematch. And Kofod didn't want any part of that. So she's filed for the seat in Senate District 5, and now there's a lot of speculation that Ann Milner's not going to run again. Haven't seen anything official from her, but we're hearing that there might be some, but haven't heard anything official from her, but there's a lot of chatter that she is not going to run again. Milner was one of the biggest voices for education in the legislature. Worked at Weber State. Very in tune with higher education. Big ally of higher education. And frankly, I think it would be a loss if she does not try to run again. But maybe she's decided that her service is done. There's going to be a battle royale in Senate District 11. And we're just talking about the Senate right now. That is the seat that was held by Republican, Forward Party member Dan Thatcher. If you will remember, on the final day of the 2025, it's 2026 now, 2025 Utah legislature, Thatcher changed his party affiliation. No longer a Republican, became a member of the Forward Party. He was the first elected official from the Forward Party in Utah. And then he announced that he was not that he was going to be resigning. The Forward Party did an online vote, and instead of letting delegates choose the replacement, they let all the people in Senate District 11 vote on the replacement, and that was won by Emily Buss. So Emily Buss is the incumbent in the race. There are 3 Republicans who have jumped in to try and win that seat back. Most notably, John Notwell. He was in the House, member of House leadership. He stepped down because he was working in high tech, and the demands of his job had become too much for him to continue serving. But he has wanted back in the legislature for a couple of years. And he was going to run for the seat whether or not Thatcher was still in it. We also have Chris Sloan, Brooks Benson, don't know much about them, but that is going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight. Democratic candidate in the race so far is Mackenzie Miller. Kathy on Instagram says, so Cofford hasn't been in the government even 2 years, and the Republican leadership is installing her in the Senate. Well, they're not installing her in the Senate. She will win the nomination, and it's a strong Republican seat. But there's a Democrat who has run or who has filed for this race that has my attention. She filed today. Her name is Cristina Hernandez. She works at, I believe she does some work at Weber State. She worked in the State Department. She was in the Air Force official. She seems like a very, very serious person, very serious candidate. I'll have to dig into her a little bit more. We also have Dakota Worth, who I believe is either a city councilman in that area. He's another Democrat in the race. But yes, this would, on paper, this would be an easier race for Cofford to win. Senate District 13 could be really interesting. That is the seat that is currently held by Nate Bluin. He is not running for another term because he is running for Congress in the 1st Congressional District, and we'll get to the redistricting case in a little bit. There are already 4 Democrats who have filed for that race. Richard Whitney, Sylvia Catton, Taylor Padden, and Evan Dunn. 4 Democrats. And why wouldn't you? You win the Democratic nomination, you're probably going to win that seat. It is a really strong Democratic seat. It was a seat that was held by Gene Davis for years and years and years until he had his ethical problems with interns. Look that up if you're curious about anything. But it makes sense that a lot of Democrats would get in on that seat. Everything else seems to be on paper. Stephanie Pitcher's got a Democratic challenger, no Republican in the race yet. Dan McKay is running for another term in Senate District 18. He does have a Republican challenger, Doug Fiafia, who was in the House last year. One-term House member is challenging him. I'm not so sure that McKay ends up on the ballot for Senate District 18. There is a lot of speculation that he wants to run for Congress, especially if Representative Burgess Owens decides not to run. And we don't know what's going to happen. The filing period for Congress is until March. Everything's still up in the air in court. But I think Dan McKay, that's the seat he wants to run for. He's been talking about it for years. So I'm not so sure he ends up on the ballot there. Over in the House, HD 6, that is the seat currently held by Matt Gwynn. Gwynn is going to resign at the end of the session to spend more time with his family. His daughter was injured in an automobile accident, vehicle accident last year, so he's going to spend some more time with her, and that's why he's stepping down. And the only Republican so far who's filed in that race is Representative Rob Bishop, former U.S. Congressman, former Speaker of the Utah House, Rob Bishop. He's in his 70s. He wants to return to the legislature. It's never happened in Utah as far as my research has shown, and I've been digging into that. And I'll have a story on that probably in a few days. But I don't think it's ever happened in the state where someone has been in the legislature, gone to Congress, and then come back to the legislature, or someone has gone to Congress and then come back to the legislature. I know it's happened in other states. I've got a list of other examples where it's happened in other states, but this would be the first time it's ever happened here in Utah. As I mentioned, HD 10, Jill Cofford is the incumbent there. She's running for Senate in Senate District 5. Rosemary Lesser, who held that seat until Cofford flipped it in the last election, she's filed, and she's the only candidate in that race right now. Interestingly, A few incumbents have not filed yet. They have until Friday, so I wouldn't get too worried about it. But House Speaker Mike Schultz has not filed for re-election yet. Representative Paul Cutler, Representative Raymond Ward has not filed for re-election, going down my list here. Representative Cheryl Acton has not filed for re-election. She's already got 2 Republican challengers in that race. Have to make a change there on my spreadsheet. Haven't seen too many other people not filing for re-election. There are 10 incumbents who are not returning next year. 10 incumbents are not running for re-election. In Senate District 6, Jerry Stevenson, Republican senator, longtime senator up there, budget chief, the budget guy, he's retiring. The only person who's filed for that race is Republican Tamara Tran, mayor. As I said, Representative Matt Gwynn is not going to run again. Karen Peterson, Representative Karen Peterson in HD 13, she is not going to run again. She was picked by delegates to replace former Representative Paul Ray in 2022. Before that, she was Governor Cox's education liaison. As we know, Representative Carrie Ann Lisenby in HD 14, she's not running again, stepping away after 5 terms in the House. There was a thought that she really wanted to run for Stevenson's seat. Stevenson, I think the hope was that he would retire before the election and there would be a delegate election. That didn't happen. I don't know. I've only heard some rumblings about that, but she's not running for another term. Representative Stuart Barlow in Fruit Heights, he's retiring after 8 terms. I've got some more on that. That's something really interesting there. Democratic Representative Sandra Hollins in HD 21, not running again. She's been in the House for 6 terms. This one was kind of a surprise. Representative Bridger Bullender in HD 29, Republican. He's not running again. He was just elected to a leadership spot on the House Majority Caucus leadership team. I think he's the assistant majority whip in the House, and he's not running for another term. In HD 34, Representative Carol Spackman Moss, Democrat, she is not going to run again. She's retiring after 26 years up at the Capitol. She was first elected in the year 2000. She's the longest serving female legislator in Utah history. 26 years, 13 terms. Won't be running for another one. Representative Tyler Clancy in HD 60. He's going to resign as soon as the legislative session is over. He's going to become the new state homeless coordinator. And Representative Christine Watkins is running for an open Carbon County Commissioner seat. She was a Democrat and then became a Republican. She served in the House from 2009 to 2012 as a Democrat, was actually in Democratic leadership at the time. She lost her re-election bid and then switched to a Republican and came back to the House in 2016, has been there ever since. She's not running for another term. Another race to watch. And this is interesting. Representative Ken Ivory in House District 39. He barely held on to his seat in the 2024. He was forced into his first ever primary contest where he beat Lisa Dean by just 590 votes. And that was really the election. The Democrats not going to win that seat. But Lisa Dean really pushed him hard. She's back. Plus, there is another Republican in that race. And I've heard that Ivory knows he's in for a battle. Ivory is used to winning the nomination at convention and then not having to do anything because he's in a safe Republican seat. Last year at the Salt Lake County Convention, He won the convention vote, but was really annoyed that he was forced into a primary because Lisa Dean had gathered signatures. You want to know how many votes Ken Ivory got at the convention to win the convention nomination? Take a guess. Just take a guess. 38. He got 38 votes at the convention, and before the signature path was a thing, that would have been enough for him to just cruise to another term. But he actually had to campaign because we had the signature path. He won by 590 votes, but it was a tough campaign, and he knows that he's in for a tough one again this time around. So pay attention to that. Someone asked, isn't someone running against Jordan Tusher? Yes. Jordan Tusher does have an opponent in HD 44, Republican Scott Stevenson, who is the head of, I believe, the Fraternal Order of Police. So that is someone who has, I'll just say that they have Tusher's attention. There were, my sources told me that when the legislature repealed HB 267, that was the union busting bill that Tusher was the main author of. My sources told me that one of the things that the legislature wanted is they were negotiating with the unions, and they wanted assurances from the unions that they weren't going to try to primary Republican legislators who had supported this. And the unions didn't agree to that, but they went ahead and took that off the table. I was never able to completely lock that down, but that was one of the things that I had heard as those negotiations were going on. So yes, Jordan Tusher does have a challenger. Now I mentioned that Stuart Barlow is not running for another term in HD 17. One of the people who has filed for that seat is Sam Barlow, and he is the son of Stuart Barlow. And if Sam Barlow wins that seat, he would become the third generation of Barlows to serve in the Utah legislature. His grandfather, Stuart's father, is Haven Barlow, who was the longest serving member of the Utah legislature ever. He spent 42 years between the Utah House and the Utah Senate. Just kind of an interesting thing. It caught my attention when that filing came across. Let's see, going through some of the comments back on TikTok, scrolling back through. I have to look at my phone. I can't figure out a way to get it on my screen, so I have to look on my phone to see if that works. Brooks says, does everyone vote in the primary? Not necessarily. In Utah, you have to be a registered Republican to vote in the Republican primary. It is a closed primary. Anybody can vote in a Democratic primary, including Republicans. But if the Republican votes in the Democratic primary, they can't vote in the Republican primary. It's one or the other. Democrats have an open primary. So, hopes that answers that question. Jay Anderson says, I'm so worried Warden might not be running again. You know, Raymond Ward's had some tough election bids the last few years, and he's been the target of some of the more extreme elements of the Republican Party in Davis County. Ashley Marie asks, how do I feel about Liban Mohammed, who's running for Congress? I haven't had much of a chance to look into his candidacy yet, so I really can't talk about that. Somebody says right back here, wait, Burgess hasn't filed yet. He doesn't have to, not yet. There's no filing for congressional seats unless you are collecting signatures, because last month, December, the legislature moved the filing date so they would have more time to appeal the judge's ruling in the redistricting case. So Congress, there's no filing for Congress until that opens on March 9th. So that answers your questions. So that's talking about what's happening with the candidate filing for Utah House and Utah Senate. It closes at 5 o'clock on Friday, and then we'll know what the field is. But there are some interesting races out there, some that that are worth your time and attention. And there's some races where, there's no challenger. So if you feel like running, maybe now is your chance. You never know. All right. Any questions? Any comments? Go ahead. Please leave those in the chat. Checking to see what else we have here. Love to hear what you are thinking about tonight. I don't know if you listened to my podcast interview that I had with Jonathan Martin from Politico magazine, but he wrote a column in December arguing that Spencer Cox should run for president in 2028, but not for the reason that you think he might. Okay? Hear me out. And this is an interesting argument by Martin. He says, Cox is not going to win the presidency in 2028. But he's been intrigued by Cox's radicalization against big technology. And he thinks that Cox could force that discussion in the next presidential campaign. We've seen candidates get in before who want to talk about a certain topic. And that's what Martin is arguing here. He says that Cox could launch a presidential campaign focused on tech regulation and AI, not to win the White House, but to force a conversation. He says that Rahm Emanuel is probably going to do the same thing on the Democratic side of things. Now, whatever you feel about Spencer Cox, my question was, why would he sacrifice his political future to do this? Because if he does this, if Spencer Cox runs for president, one, he's not going to win. Two, it probably precludes him from running from any other elected office in the future, but it does give him a platform, and he might be able to launch something off of that. Martin says Cox should embrace his, quote, dark side. That's what he calls this governor who's willing to take on Silicon Valley in ways that would make traditional politicians uncomfortable. And is there a lane for that? You have to wonder. And Martin brought up something very interesting in our conversation. He said that Cox could potentially partner with Rahm Emanuel or other Democrats to talk about big tech regulation. That would be catnip for Spencer Cox. Do you remember that ad he did with his Democratic opponent in the 2020 gubernatorial race? He got so much mileage off of that. That he did it again. He recorded one with Democratic Governor Wes Moore of Maryland recently. I don't think you would have to convince him to go back to that well. Because, like I said, that would be catnip for him. And there is precedent for that. John McCain, John McCain Republican, Bill Bradley the Democrat, they teamed up during the 2000 presidential campaign to talk about campaign finance. I could easily see Cox doing that. Now, practically, if Cox did jump into that race as the big tech opponent, that would invite a flood of money from big tech. You would see people like Elon Musk drop, $100 million, whatever, outspend Cox, spend Cox into oblivion, and not even break a sweat. That's one of the problems. For me, the timing of all this is fascinating because Cox got a book deal that we just found out about it. I broke that news because I'm a sick puppy and I like scrolling through financial disclosures on a whim. I saw that he had a deal with Penguin Publishing, so Cox has a book deal coming out. Martin's not the first person to raise him as a possible presidential candidate. He was floated by the Washington Post as a non-MAGA candidate or a less MAGA candidate. What is it that Ian Fleming said? Once is happenstance, two is a coincidence, three is enemy action. Three times is enemy action. So for me, the fact that this is the third time, the third thing in succession, that got my antenna twitching. But let me know what you think. You think Cox would do that? Do you think he should run for president just to take on big tech and push his platform of big tech? I mean, this is his big hobby horse, and I don't think he's wrong. Off of TikTok, Cox doesn't have the name recognition to even force a conversation. Yeah, I mean that's the reality of it. He did have that big profile on 60 Minutes after the Charlie Kirk assassination, railing against big tech. But you do have to wonder if he would even make it to Iowa. There's a reason why Mitt Romney ran for president after becoming governor of Massachusetts. You don't run for president after becoming, the governor of Utah. Don't do it. It's not a springboard. Someone says that way it opens up a new governor and we need new government. Well, we are going to have a new governor in 2028. Cox is not going to run again. He's already said after 2 terms he's done. So Cox is not running for governor again. Phil Lyman is running for governor as Republican. It's pretty obvious that Jason Chaffetz is going to run for governor. House Speaker Mike Schultz is trying to position himself to run for governor, or at least it's well known that that's something he wants to do. I suspect that Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson wants to run as well. And that's very interesting because Deidre Henderson was probably one of the main reasons why Jason Chaffetz got elected in the first place to Congress. She was one of his loyal campaign workers, worked on his staff, and she worked hard getting him that win, defeating Chris Cannon, knocking off Chris Cannon in the Republican primary. So it's interesting that they might be going head-to-head for this. So yeah, we are going to have a new governor in 2020. Brooks says if he's against big tech, why push for data centers here? Because that's the only thing that's propping up the economy across the country is data centers. That's it. Construction of data centers. Nothing else is really propping up the American economy, which is frightening. But everybody wants those data centers. I remember when everybody wanted big tech jobs, and then we got Silicon Slopes. The problem is we're competing with every other state for that. And he doesn't have a lot of, he doesn't set the policy. That's the legislature. He is pushing for nuclear power, which will be interesting to see how that works out. Hillary Swingle says, since when are mainstream Republicans interested in tech regulation, though? That's Martin's point. That's Jonathan Martin's point. He thinks that Cox would be able to force that conversation into the campaign. Will it work? I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if that's what he decides to do. Misplaced Millennial says, I'm just waiting for Cox to ask us to pray for snow. That's funny. I like that. Although we need it. I am freaked out by this weather. I mean, I am low-key freaking out. It should not be this warm in December. And those mountains are pretty damn bare. This summer is going to suck. See, I'm trying to look through here. Blue Goose on TikTok says, the force big tech into a conversation, Cox is really a nobody out there on the world stage or the U.S. It just depends on if the media decides to take him seriously. After the Charlie Kirk assassination, he was the new shiny object because he got up in front of the cameras and expressed righteous indignation against big tech. And he had a point. That's why he got the big profile on 60 Minutes. That's why he was interviewed by Ezra Klein on his podcast. That's why he was interviewed on NPR. It just depends on if that's the thing that fascinates the media. So, I mean, his profile is, you're right, his profile is not huge. It's not a Gavin Newsom. It's not a J.B. Pritzker. It's not governor of Republican states, Greg Abbott in Texas. But it is growing, not fast, but it is growing. And don't forget, he does have that book deal coming out. And that should be out in the next couple of years. I'm not sure exactly when the publication date is. So, anyway, any other questions or comments on what's happening? I want to hear your thoughts. I wrote a piece today about the 5-year anniversary of the January 6th attack on the Capitol and how Senator Mike Lee still has not sufficiently answered questions about his role in the lead up to that. If you're interested, you can go to my website, utahpolitics.news, and read that there. I did post the video, and it was a good time to bring this back up. But if you remember in 2022, there was that blockbuster CNN story after Mike Lee's text messages with Mark Meadows leaked. The ones where he said, "Please tell me what I should be saying." Asking for marching orders from the White House. Right after that happened, I knew Senator Lee, who was not talking to anybody, was going to be at the Summit County Republican Convention. So I got in my car and I drove up to Summit County, and you'll see it on the video. I tried to ask him about what was happening. I tried to ask him about this story, about these text messages that showed he was far more involved in this effort to overturn the election than we had previously known. And what did he do? He ran from me. And you can see the video. I posted it on all my socials. It's also on my website. He ran from me. He literally ran while his staffers stood in front of me, blocked me so I couldn't get to him. In fact, one of them literally grabbed my backpack and pulled on it as I was trying to run after him. And I posted that video online. I thought this was a good time to bring that back up. But yes, Mike Lee ran from me. Let's see. A few other stories in the news. Representative Trevor Lee wants to make it so that you can get ivermectin at a pharmacy without a prescription. If you remember, during COVID, a lot of people thought that ivermectin, which is an animal dewormer, was effective in stopping the spread of COVID. It wasn't. Now the same people think that it's effective. It could be effective in stopping the spread of cancer. It's not. But it doesn't matter. Representative Lee wants to make it so that anybody can, over the age of 18, can go to a pharmacy and get human-grade ivermectin without a prescription. If you remember, people were trying to get it during the pandemic, and they ended up going to Tractor Supply and getting the animal formulation. That's why it got the name horse paste. So, by his logic, anybody can get this unproven medication to try and self-medicate, but you shouldn't be able to get vaccines because vaccines are bad. At least that's MAGA's. That's the philosophy of MAGA. So anyway, we're gonna have that, but he does have that bill, and just as a side note, Scott Adams, the cartoonist who drew Dilbert and has now become a right-wing reactionary on social media, He tried to use ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, that's the malaria medicine that also became popular during COVID, to try and treat his prostate cancer. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. And this week he revealed that he's probably got about a month to live. He's too far gone. There's nothing he can do about it. So what could be the harm in just allowing people to access this stuff and self-medicate at pharmacies? Oh, and Representative Lee knows that there's a lot of risk to this because his bill contains big time exemptions from liability. Doctors who authorize a pharmacy to dispense ivermectin, they can't be sued. And the only way a pharmacy can be sued is if there's gross negligence. So he knows that this is a problem. He knows that people could get hurt. So he's taking all of the legal liability out of it. Representative Walt Brooks has a bill that he wants to make it so it is legal to carry a gun on college campuses without a permit, without a concealed carry permit. Right now, you can pretty much carry a gun anywhere in the state without a concealed carry permit, but if you want to carry on a college campus, you have to have a concealed carry permit. But he wants to change that and make it so that you don't have to have a concealed carry permit. That's a bill that's in the upcoming legislative session. How to basically make college campuses, public campuses, have the same rules as everywhere else in the state. Colleges could still ban guns in some narrowly defined areas, just a couple of places on campus. Private colleges, BYU, Westminster University, they would be able to ban guns on campus because you can't make policy for that, but the legislature can make policy for public colleges and universities. And there's a subtle change in his bill. Right now, if a student wants to keep a gun in their room, if they're living in on-campus housing and they want to keep it in their room, prospective roommates can opt out of living with someone who has a concealed carry permit because you would need to have a concealed carry permit to keep a gun in your room. Now we're taking the permit under Brooks's bill. They're taking that permit out of the equation. So now students can request roommates who, quote, choose not to lawfully possess firearms in the residence dormitory. But that leaves it up to the honor system. There's no requirement that someone disclose that they have a gun in the dorm room. So taking that out. So that's one of that's a bill that's coming up in the next session. Going back through some of the comments, and if you do have a comment, I'd love to hear it. Scrolling back. Someone says, do we have any updates on the ballot initiative's progress? They have about 20 to 30,000 verified signatures. They are very behind. They still have time, though. They have until February 15th, Valentine's Day, or the 14th, Valentine's Day. That's the deadline for turning them in. So they have time. But yes, they are lagging behind. I'm trying to do some analysis on that right now, and they're posting the signatures online. One of the things that I'm able to do is I'm able to match voters with the voter file. And I can figure out and see what the party affiliation is of where those signatures are. And I can also map them to House districts. That's something that you can't do right now. So I'll be having some analysis on that coming up in the next couple of days. But right now they are behind. I did see a live stream last night with Republican Party Chairman Rob Axson. He was speaking to the far-right group, Utah Citizens for the Constitution. He was talking about this, and he says that they are confident that they're going to get the signatures. Again, they have to get over 140,000 signatures statewide, and they have to get signatures that equal 8% of the active voters in 26 of the state's 29 Senate districts. It's very hard to get these on the ballot. Very hard to get these ballot initiatives on the ballot. And if you're just tuning in, we're talking about the ballot initiative to repeal Prop 4, which is Utah's anti-gerrymandering law, which established the Independent Redistricting Commission. Maybe they will get there. So far, my preliminary analysis shows that most of the people that the majority of people who have signed this are Republicans. There's also an effort. There is a period of time where people can remove their signature, and you're seeing some people say this happens every single time. See some people say that they didn't understand what they signed and they want to remove their signature. It has worked in the past, though. In 2018, Proposition 1, which was the Count My Vote proposition, which would have gotten rid of the caucus and convention system for nominating candidates. They got enough signatures to get on the ballot, but opponents launched a campaign to get people to remove their signatures from the petition, and they were able to get just enough people in 2 Senate districts to take their signatures off the petition, and that proposition did not make the ballot. Rob Mosier on Instagram says, will the signatures matter if they go to the state Supreme Court? That is a separate issue. The ballot initiative to repeal Prop 4 is separate from the current lawsuit over the congressional maps. And what happened, this happened right after Christmas. In fact, the day after Christmas, Judge Gibson, if you will remember, lawmakers were pushing the judge to declare part of the case final because they had missed the deadlines for appealing her decision. And there was a hastily scheduled court hearing right before the holidays. The legislature was asking the judge to declare certain issues in the case final, which is not done. That's not something that's done. But the day after Christmas, the judge came out and said, I'm going to do this because I think that this is an issue that the Supreme Court needs to settle. This needs to be heard before the Supreme Court. The constitutional issues that it is raising need to be heard. And so that's what gave the legislature the ability to appeal this ruling. But in her decision, she scolded them because she said that they deliberately bypassed the proper legal channels that were available to them to appeal months ago. Reading from her opinion, she says, with election deadlines imminent, the legislative defendants repeatedly stated they intended to appeal, but then intentionally elected not to utilize the more appropriate appellate tools available to them. They missed the deadline. They missed the deadline twice. They had the ability to do that. Nathan Detroit says on YouTube, was Phil Lyman hosting Axon? I think he's on that Constitutional Groups board. He was there at the invitation of the organizer, which is Jen Brown, and I could spend a lot of time talking about Jen Brown. Looks like we have frozen, and I'm not sure why. I'm seeing the video freeze on pretty much every platform. I don't know what that is. Well, I'm not dropping any frames. I'm not sure why it's freezing. Someone says I can still hear you on Twitch. Rob Mosier says, luckily it froze on a good frame. You still look great. Let me see if I can restart this. So hang on. There's still a little bit to talk about. So let me stop this, and then I will restart the whole thing. So I'll be back momentarily, everybody, and we'll figure that out. Let me just redo this here. Yeah, everyone says that it's frozen. Let me see if I can fix that. Nope, still frozen. Let me